I had great trouble. I think that they were horrified that I was going to take this on. I didn't really belong there. I have to say, they could not have been meaner.
The generators won't take it.
All right, it's always about you, isn't it?
They said it would never work. A rejected parody that executives thought was too nerdy, too niche, and destined to fail. But what began as a throwaway Star Trek spoof somehow transformed into one of the most beloved cult classics in movie history. Behind the laughs, though, was a battlefield. Actors fought against studios, entire scenes were nearly cut, and one character's most iconic moment almost didn't exist at all. What fans saw on screen was hilarious. But what happened behind the scenes? That was chaos, heartbreak, and unexpected triumph. And here's the shocking part. The movie almost didn't happen at all. This is the untold story of Galaxy Quest, the film that fought its way from studio rejection to sci-fi legend. From Sigourney Weaver's secret battle to protect her character, to Tim Allen's risky leap of faith, to the tragic loss that stopped the sequel in its tracks, this is the side of Galaxy Quest you've never heard before. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see this movie forever. Before Galaxy Quest could ever win over fans, it had to survive a brutal fight just to get made. And at first, it looked like the film was doomed before cameras ever rolled. When the script first landed on studio desks in the late 90s, most executives didn't laugh, they groaned. The idea of a Star Trek parody was seen as way too narrow, way too geeky, and worst of all, unprofitable. Studios thought the jokes were inside baseball references only hardcore sci-fi fans would get. And in Hollywood, that kind of niche didn't scream blockbuster. Executives were blunt. This won't sell. Nobody cares about a Star Trek knockoff. To them, it wasn't a clever love letter, it was a guaranteed flop. But here's where they completely missed the point. Galaxy Quest wasn't just making fun of sci-fi, it was celebrating it. The writers had crafted a script that poked fun at the cliches, yes, but underneath the jokes was something heartfelt. An appreciation for fandom, a respect for the weird quirks of the genre, and a story about people who discover that even silly roles can mean something. The early drafts balanced sharp satire with genuine affection, and fans who later discovered the film knew it right away. But executives only saw risk. They weren't looking for a layered parody. They wanted something safe, something mainstream, something easy to market. And let's be honest, imagine the pitch meeting. We want to make a comedy about a washed-up group of actors who used to star in a fake Star Trek-style show. And then aliens mistake them for real space heroes and drag them into an intergalactic war. On paper, it sounded absurd, but that absurdity was the magic. Still, back then, the industry wasn't kind to movies that leaned too heavily on nerd culture. Remember, this was years before Marvel turned comic book fandom into box office gold. In the 90s, studios didn't believe nerds could drive a blockbuster, and Galaxy Quest was swimming against the current. Even as the script was being tossed around, execs debated if it should be reworked into something broader, cut the nerd references, make it more of a straight slapstick comedy. The heart of the story, the thing that made it different, was in danger of being gutted before production even began. But then, something shifted. As the script made its way through Hollywood, a handful of actors and filmmakers saw what the studios didn't. They noticed the layers. This wasn't just a spoof, it was about the bond between fans and the characters they love. It was about the people behind the costumes, struggling with typecasting and fading fame. It was about giving heart to something that, on the surface, looked ridiculous. At its core, Galaxy Quest was a story about redemption, about realizing that even if the world sees you as a joke, you still have the chance to become a hero. And that's exactly why Sigourney Weaver was drawn to it. While executives rolled their eyes, Weaver saw depth. She didn't see just another comedy. She saw a chance to tell a story about artists, fandom, and identity. And that belief would prove crucial in saving the film from being watered down. But back in those early days, that future wasn't guaranteed. For a while, Galaxy Quest was a script everyone loved to laugh at, but not one they wanted to invest in. It would take a passionate fight from the cast, a change of heart from the studios, and some surprising twists of fate before the movie finally got greenlit. And what happened next? That's where Sigourney Weaver stepped in, not just as an actress, but as the defender of the film's soul. When Sigourney Weaver officially joined Galaxy Quest, the movie suddenly had weight. This wasn't just some quirky parody anymore. This was Ripley from Alien, a Hollywood powerhouse, attaching her name to what most executives thought was a throwaway sci-fi comedy. And Weaver didn't sign on blindly. She knew what she was stepping into. And more importantly, she knew what was at stake. She'd spent her entire career fighting against stereotypes, pigeonholed roles for women, scripts that treated female characters like decoration. With Alien, she'd shattered the idea that women couldn't lead action films. With Ghostbusters, she proved she could handle comedy just as well as horror. So when she read the Galaxy Quest script, she recognized both the danger and the opportunity. The danger? That the movie could easily fall into lazy parody, mocking the genre and reducing her character to nothing more than a blonde joke. The opportunity? To do something smarter to parody while also honoring the fans and showing the value in those throwaway TV roles. But Hollywood wasn't going to make that easy. From day one, Weaver had to push back against changes that would have stripped the movie of its sincerity. Studio notes kept rolling in. Make it sillier, make it broader, remove the fan references because general audiences won't get them. Weaver fought against that. She understood that the jokes only worked if there was heart behind them. If you mocked the fans too much, you lost the very people who would care most about the movie. She argued that Galaxy Quest needed to walk a fine line, laugh at the cliches, but never at the passion behind them. And she wasn't alone. Tim Allen, Alan Rickman, and the rest of the cast rallied around that idea. But Weaver's battle didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, executives debated how her character Gwen DeMarco, the ship's communications officer, should be portrayed. In early drafts, Gwen was little more than eye candy, a play on the token blonde trope in old sci-fi shows. The fear was that she'd be reduced to a background joke while the male characters drove the story. Weaver refused to let that happen. She leaned into the parody, yes, but on her own terms. She amplified Gwen's awareness of her ridiculous role, repeating the ship's computer and being ignored by the crew, but she also made sure Gwen had depth. She wasn't just there for laughs. She was part of the team, vital to the mission, and someone fans could actually root for. This balancing act was one of Weaver's biggest contributions. She knew that if she played Gwen straight, with no self-awareness, the character would fall flat. But if she overplayed it, it would become pure mockery. Instead, she found the sweet spot. Gwen was funny, but she was also real. And by doing so, Weaver elevated what could have been a throwaway role into one of the film's most memorable characters. And here's the thing, her fight paid off. Test screenings later proved that Gwen resonated with audiences. Fans loved her because she wasn't just a joke, she was a mirror of how women had been treated in sci-fi, and a wink at the fact that they deserved so much more. But Weaver's influence didn't stop at character development. On set, she became the unofficial protector of the movie's tone. Whenever the studio tried to push for bigger laughs or dumber jokes, Weaver reminded everyone that what made the movie special wasn't the cheap humor. It was the balance between satire and sincerity. And that wasn't just stubbornness. Weaver knew something the executives didn't. If Galaxy Quest was going to succeed, it had to earn the respect of the very fans it was parodying. But while Weaver was fighting to keep the heart of the movie intact, another storm was brewing. The casting of Tim Allen, a sitcom star at the height of his fame, brought new challenges, and not everyone on set was thrilled about it. And what happened when Weaver and Allen's very different approaches collided? That's where things got interesting. If Sigourney Weaver was fighting to preserve the movie's heart, Tim Allen was battling for something entirely different. His place in Hollywood beyond sitcom stardom. At the time, Allen was the face of Home Improvement, a family-friendly dad figure with a goofy, lovable image. But in Galaxy Quest, he wasn't just the funny guy. He was cast as Jason Nesmith, a washed-up actor who played a fake starship captain and was now trying to reclaim his faded glory. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Nesmith's arc, an actor clinging to his past fame, mirrored what critics whispered about Allen himself, and that parallel created tension on set. Allen leaned heavily into the comedy, wanting to make scenes bigger, broader, louder, but Rickman and Weaver? They wanted subtlety, sincerity, and respect for the material. The clash was immediate. Rickman, a classically trained actor, grew frustrated with Allen's improvisational chaos. Weaver reportedly had to step in more than once, smoothing over disagreements and keeping the set from boiling over. To her, Allen's brashness wasn't sabotage, it was insecurity. He was trying to prove he could carry a movie against heavyweights like her and Rickman. But here's the twist. That very tension ended up saving the film. Allen's over-the-top bravado made Nesmith's arrogance believable, while the restraint of Rickman and Weaver gave the movie its grounding. The push and pull created chemistry that you simply can't fake. Yet behind the laughter, the set wasn't as lighthearted as fans might imagine. Studio pressures, clashing egos, and constant rewrites meant everyone was walking a tightrope. And just when it seemed like they'd found balance, disaster struck because the director himself was suddenly on the chopping block. Just when the cast was finally settling into their roles, the chaos behind the camera nearly derailed everything. Originally, Galaxy Quest had a very different creative vision. The studio had hired a director who wanted to push the movie into darker, edgier territory, a sci-fi satire with sharp jabs at celebrity culture and Hollywood exploitation. On paper, it sounded bold. In practice, it was a disaster. The problem? The tone clashed with the script the actors had signed up for. Weaver and Rickman wanted clever satire, yes, but they also wanted heart. Tim Allen envisioned a crowd-pleasing comedy that played to families as much as sci-fi diehards. The darker approach threatened to alienate both. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a ticking bomb on set. The studio finally pulled the plug on the first director, sending shockwaves through the cast. Imagine being halfway into filming, only to learn the person guiding the ship was gone. For many productions, that's the kiss of death. Morale drops, confusion sets in, and continuity falls apart. But here's where Galaxy Quest got lucky. Enter Dean Parisot, a relatively unknown director with a knack for balancing humor and sincerity. Parisot didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Instead, he leaned into the cast's strengths. He let Rickman play the dry, Shakespearean cynic. He encouraged Weaver to embrace her satirical but warm-hearted role. And he gave Allen enough rope to be larger than life without letting him overshadow the story. The shift was immediate. Scenes that felt forced under the old direction now came alive. The cast rallied, scripts were tweaked, and suddenly the movie found its tone. Funny without being silly, heartfelt without being cheesy. Still, the scars of that transition never fully healed. Some scenes had to be reshot. Money was bleeding fast, and the pressure from executives only grew louder. And then came the most ruthless cut of all, literally. Because when the movie was finally finished, the studio decided to slice away one of its most important elements, leaving the cast furious and fans stunned years later when they learned the truth. With the cast finally gelling and Dean Parisot steering the film back on course, Galaxy Quest was poised to deliver the sharp, clever satire fans deserved. But just as things seemed safe, the studio swooped in and made a decision that changed the movie forever. DreamWorks wanted Galaxy Quest to be a family hit, not a niche sci-fi parody. That meant one thing. The movie had to secure a PG rating at all costs. On the surface, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but to the cast, it was devastating. Entire scenes were chopped, dialogue was softened, and moments that gave the film its bite were erased in the editing room. Sigourney Weaver was hit the hardest. Her character, Gwen DeMarco, was originally written with a lot more edge, more wit, more adult humor, and a stronger critique of how Hollywood treated women. In fact, Weaver herself revealed in interviews that some of her best lines were cut because they were deemed too suggestive. Her iconic moment of yelling, "Well, that," was literally overdubbed to say, "Well, screw that," for the PG rating. Fans never knew at the time, but the actors certainly did. Alan Rickman reportedly rolled his eyes at the watered-down dialogue, calling it neutered. Tim Allen also admitted frustration, since many of his bigger comedic punches were trimmed or rephrased to avoid offending parents. The cast felt like the movie had been softened to the point of losing some of its spark. But here's the irony. While the actors were furious, the studio's gamble worked. The PG rating made the film accessible to a much wider audience. especially kids who would later grow up to become its most loyal fans. In a strange twist, the very cuts that frustrated the stars may have saved the movie from flopping. Still, fans have long wondered, what would the uncut Galaxy Quest have looked like? Reports suggest it was sharper, bolder, and far less family-friendly, a version that might have changed the way we talk about the movie today. And yet, even with the cuts, the chaos wasn't over. Because when the film finally hit theaters, the cast had no idea that critics would absolutely bury it. When Galaxy Quest finally premiered in 1999, the cast braced themselves. After months of delays, rewrites, reshoots, and studio meddling, they didn't know what to expect. What they got was a brutal reality check. Critics were not kind. Many dismissed the film as a cheap Star Trek spoof, accusing it of being just another goofy space comedy. Some reviewers even singled out Tim Allen, saying his performance was too close to his sitcom persona from Home Improvement. Alan Rickman, despite his commanding presence, was criticized as being wasted on a role that felt beneath his talents. For the cast, especially veterans like Rickman and Weaver, it stung deeply. Sigourney Weaver was particularly frustrated. She had fought for her character to avoid becoming just a one-note joke. And when critics dismissed the film, it felt like all her effort had been ignored. Rickman, too, privately vented that the movie hadn't given him the kind of material that would earn respect from serious reviewers. Even Tim Allen, usually the most confident of the bunch, admitted later that he feared the movie would be forgotten in a matter of weeks. But while critics shrugged, something else was happening in the theaters. Fans loved it. Audiences laughed, cheered, and connected with the story in a way the cast hadn't anticipated. Word of mouth spread quickly. Science fiction fans, especially diehard Trekkies, embraced the movie as more than parody. They saw it as a heartfelt love letter to fandom itself, a film that poked fun at their passion while also celebrating it. This divide between critics and fans was huge. On paper, Galaxy Quest wasn't a box office smash it earned modest numbers compared to blockbusters of the era. But the loyalty of fans turned it into something bigger. Slowly, the film developed a cult following. Conventions started screening it. Fans dressed as characters. Lines from the film became in-jokes among sci-fi communities. The cast, however, didn't know this at first. In those early days, all they felt was disappointment, believing the movie had failed. What they didn't realize was that over the next decade, Galaxy Quest would rise from critical rejection to legendary status. And that rise would come with its own share of controversies, cast tensions, and tragic turns no one could have predicted. What the critics dismissed, the fans refused to let die. Over the years, Galaxy Quest transformed into something far bigger than anyone on set had imagined. At conventions, the film was quoted alongside Star Trek and Star Wars. Entire panels were dedicated to dissecting its humor, its meta-commentary, and its strangely heartfelt story about washed-up actors finding real purpose in the role they once faked. But behind the fan devotion, the cast wasn't always on the same page. The tensions that had simmered during production didn't completely disappear once the camera stopped rolling. Tim Allen, riding high on his sitcom and movie fame, was often at odds with Alan Rickman, who continued to see the film as a project beneath his dramatic abilities. Even after the cult following began to grow, Rickman reportedly admitted he had complicated feelings about the role. He appreciated the love from fans, but couldn't ignore how much he had initially resented the comedic tone. Sigourney Weaver found herself in the middle again. She loved the fans and was openly supportive of the movie's cult resurgence, but she also knew some cast members carried grudges. Weaver's interviews years later made it clear, while the film had become beloved, the set hadn't been all sunshine. Arguments, bruised egos, and creative disagreements had left scars. Then came the tragedy no fan expected. Alan Rickman's passing in 2016 hit the Galaxy Quest community like a gut punch. Fans flooded online forums, sharing how much his dry, sarcastic portrayal of Alexander Dane had meant to them. Suddenly, a performance Rickman had once felt conflicted about was being celebrated as one of his most iconic. Even Tim Allen, who had sparred with him on set, gave a heartfelt tribute, admitting he hadn't realized just how much Rickman had elevated the movie until years later. But Rickman's death also cast a shadow over Hollywood's secret plans. Amazon had been quietly developing a Galaxy Quest TV series, with the original cast set to return. The project was moving forward, scripts were being drafted, deals were being negotiated. Then Rickman passed, and the revival collapsed. Without him, the heart of the film felt impossible to recapture. Fans were devastated, knowing they'd never see the original crew together again. Still, the cult status of Galaxy Quest only grew stronger. What was once dismissed as a spoof became recognized as one of the greatest sci-fi comedies of all time. Directors like J.J. Abrams and actors from Star Trek openly praised it, admitting it captured the soul of fandom better than most serious space adventures ever had. The irony? The very movie that critics ignored became immortal, while the cast that had fought so bitterly to control its tone never truly got to enjoy the recognition together. But if fans thought the legacy of Galaxy Quest was set in stone, they were wrong. Because in Hollywood, nothing stays buried forever, and whispers of a new revival have begun to stir. Even more than 20 years after its release, Galaxy Quest continues to resonate in ways few comedies ever do. It's not just a film, it's a love letter to sci-fi, fandom, and the people who bring both to life. Fans still quote lines like, "Never give up, never surrender," in conventions, online forums, and even casual conversation. And the movie has inspired generations of creators to approach parody with respect and heart. The magic of the movie lies in its careful balance. It never mocked fans for their passion. Instead, it celebrated them. It honored the actors who sometimes feel trapped by the roles they play, showing that even in silly, low-budget worlds, there's meaning and courage to be found. Sigourney Weaver's fight for Gwen DeMarco's emotional depth, Tim Allen's risky embrace of Nesmith's flawed hero, and Alan Rickman's dry, sardonic brilliance all combine to elevate a parody into something timeless. Yet, the story of Galaxy Quest isn't just about the past, it's about what could come next. Rumors of a reboot or continuation have circulated for years. After Alan Rickman's tragic passing, many assumed the project was permanently shelved. His absence was too great. Dr. Lazarus had been the emotional anchor, and the cast agreed that nothing could replace him. Still, whispers persisted. Fans have long speculated about whether Sigourney Weaver, Tim Allen, and the remaining cast could someday return in a way that honors Rickman's memory while bringing fresh energy to the story. The franchise's potential revival isn't just about nostalgia. A new version could explore unexplored characters, delve deeper into the Theron's world, or even examine how sci-fi fandom has evolved in the decades since the original. The story that started as a niche parody now has the chance to connect with a global audience, reaching both die-hard fans and newcomers who've never even seen the original series. What's striking is how the film's legacy continues to influence Hollywood. Directors like J.J. Abrams, Taika Waititi, and even writers for modern sci-fi comedies cite Galaxy Quest as a blueprint for combining humor, heart, and fandom respect. It's a reminder that parody can be more than cheap laughs. It can carry emotion, celebrate devotion, and even inspire empathy for both fans and creators. At the same time, the movie's real-life story, the fights, the rewrites, the PG cuts, the tension between stars, and the grief over Rickman remains a cautionary tale. Success doesn't erase struggle, and even cult classics are forged in chaos. But that chaos is part of the charm, part of what makes Galaxy Quest not just a movie, but a cultural touchstone. So what does the future hold? Only time will tell. If the stars of the original will reunite, if the Theorons will return, or if a new generation will discover the joy, humor, and heart that made the movie legendary. One thing is certain, Galaxy Quest proved that even a spoof can become sacred, that even a silly sci-fi parody can teach real lessons about courage, fandom, and the human spirit. For fans old and new, the story isn't over, it's just waiting for the next adventure.